So I wanted to first talk a little bit about Center for Animals and Public Policy, as well as the Masters in Animals and Public Policy program, some of our work supporting animal welfare, answering any questions, and then share a little bit about some of my recent research and answer any questions about that. So let's see if I need to move this over so I can see. There we go. All right, so we are at the Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine at Tufts University. Our campus is in Grafton, which is a little more central Mass. So we're not at the Boston Medford campus. At Cummings School, there is the DVM program for students becoming veterinarians, but we also have very active research programs and other academic programs, one of which is the Masters in Animals and Public Policy. So it's nice because we have a nice integration with the veterinary curriculum, and there's sometimes vet students in our classes, and sometimes our students are taking classes, other classes, and including electives in the other master's programs. So the Center for Animals and Public Policy, that's our little house where our offices are. So we're working to examine the role of animals in our society and the policies around those animals that affect animals and the human-animal interactions. So our values are that animal well-being matters, and that animal and human well-being are linked, and that both are improved and enhanced through a better understanding of human-animal relationships. So that's really where we focus. And that can be in a variety of areas. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But again, we're at the Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine, and we have a great connection with the veterinary school, the faculty and staff and students in the veterinary school, and that provides a really well-rounded view and basis for conversations around human-animal relationships and how to improve animal well-being. So our 4 areas of focus, start on the right side, top right, companion animal welfare and behavior. And this is really focused on supporting pet welfare and ownership, looking at animal shelter, policy and practice, as well as applied animal behavior. We'll also look at human-animal relationships, and this may include animal-assisted interventions. You may have heard of AAI or AAT, animal-assisted therapies, examining the human-animal bond, psychology of pet ownership. Of course, we're not just focused on companion animals, looking at wildlife, so humans' interactions and relationships with wildlife, so human-wildlife conflict, urban wildlife policy, zookeeping, so anything related to wildlife. And we also look at lab and farm animal welfare. So this would be our policy and practice area around animal use, regulation of animals and research, food animal policy. So we're really trying to look at all areas where humans intersect with and manage animals and the welfare implications, how to improve the welfare of the animals in these areas and improve the relationships between animals and people. So the MAPP program, the Masters in Animals and Public Policy program, part of the Center for Animals and Public Policy, we're first and foremost an animal policy program, and this is fairly unique in the country, where we're really focused on the place and roles of animals in society and how people interact with animals, the relationships we have, and the ways we manage and oversee animal populations. So we're really trying to prepare our students to work in animal policy, but that means it could be small, like policies at a shelter, policies at a farm, or it could be very large policies across the federal policies across the country. So there's all sorts of ways policy can be implemented and conceptualized, but we're preparing our students to build those skills in analysis, research, and communication, talking to a wide range of stakeholders, understanding different views, really giving exposure to a wide range of issues related to animals, and training our students to gather information, to be open to multiple viewpoints, to facilitating conversations so that we can come to some common ground, to advocate for on behalf of animals and people and our relationships with animals. And we're really great at connecting our students with animal advocates and practitioners, so that you can build your network and find a place where you want to be helping animals. So we have a couple of some recent photos of different interactions with students from long ago, more recent students, conferences and presentations and advocacy meetings, so all across the country. I love looking at that slide because I get to see some familiar faces there. So as far as the MAPP program, the curriculum, it's a 12 to 18 month program. There's a core curriculum that everybody takes those core classes. And then there are two tracks, a research track or applied track. And so pretty much the fall classes are the same for everybody. The core classes are the same, and there's some electives. And then by the end of the semester, students are applying and opting into the research track, or they're staying on the applied track. And then depending on which path they're going, their spring and summer semesters look a little different. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the core curriculum, there are two courses, Animals in Society, one's in the fall and one's in the spring, and there are different modules in that. An introduction to policy and animal issues, human-animal interaction seminar, lab animal, farm animal, wildlife, companion animal. So there are these different modules that are focused on topics within that area. All students take a research methods course in the fall, which is familiarizing students with qualitative and quantitative research skills. They take a statistics class in the fall, and then a public policy analysis in the spring. So those are the core courses. Then for research track, which students can apply to, they're going to do some investigation, figuring out what they're interested in researching, finding a mentor, and then if they're accepted on that program, that adds an extra semester to the program. So students on the research track finish in December of the following year they matriculate. And they will take in the spring statistics 2, research methods 2, and then they'll be doing their research project in the summer and fall. And then here's some recent titles. I mean, it's really very much student driven, whatever the student is interested in, but we work hard to find a good match for a faculty advisor so that we can best support you. So some examples of recent studies looking at attitudes towards seals of Cape Cod fishermen, or the impact of COVID-19 on Connecticut dairy farms, welfare of breeding dogs, caretaker knowledge of pet reptiles, experiences of Black people in animal welfare, and how they found the animal welfare field and what they think is needed to create a more welcoming space. Then the applied track, there's a required, in addition to the core courses, applied track students are taking a communicating policies position in the spring, and then they do an externship, which is like an internship, in the summer, and they finish in August, the end of August, the end of the summer semester. So that would be about 12 months after enrollment. And we work with students to sort out their interests and find an appropriate placement and support them through the summer during their externship. So these are some recent organizations which hosted MAPP students in their externships: MSPCA, Animal Rescue of Boston, Zoo New England, in a government position, USDA in Rhode Island. We have students going down to Animal Welfare Institute in Washington, D.C. So it's really driven by the students' interests and also the logistics, their ability to, if they want to travel or not, are able to relocate for the summer or something like that. So spend a lot of time working with the students to find the best placement that would satisfy their interests as well as the logistics that work for them. All right, we do have electives, a certain number of electives in the fall and a certain number in the spring. So these include animal law or wildlife in captivity, animal welfare science, human dimensions of animal behavior, applied animal behavior, and then some 1 credit electives that are more like kind of practice, pause for people or shelter visits or the community cat clinic. So these are just a sampling of some of the electives we have. And there's room for at least 1 elective in the fall. Sometimes students take 2, but often they'll take 1 and maybe like which is a 3-credit elective, and then they might take a 1-credit elective. And then in the spring, the applied track students have a little more room for additional electives. The research track students usually take 1 elective in the spring. All right, and then we always get this question, like, where do people go next? So about 30% of our graduates go on to animal protection or conservation nonprofits. About 20% go on to regional humane societies. 30% go on to veterinary law or PhD programs, and about 12% go on to government service or research compliance. So that might be an IACUC program at a university, or it might be, USDA or something like that, a government agency related to animals. And this gives you a feel for a few MAPP alumni who, where they're located. It really ranges, because that is one really amazing thing about our program is people come from all different backgrounds and they're interested in all different things. So it's a very mixed, diverse group, and where they end up, it ranges all over the place, from a private nonprofit to on the smaller scale, working at a regional or local level, to a national level, to government, to and then of course some who are going on to other education, like veterinary school or a PhD or law school or something like that. So we do have 2 application deadlines, February 3rd and April 1st. So keep those in mind. And I'd encourage you to sign up for the open house. It's virtual, and you get to hear some more information and details about the program. You can actually virtually attend one of the classes that day, and just gives you a little bit better feel for what the program is like. And then certainly any of the faculty, Ginny, we'd be happy to talk with you, explore your interests a little more, answer any specific questions you might have. So just want to open it up. What questions do you have so far about the MAPP program or CAP? Give it a minute. Yes, there is some funding for the research track. It's somewhat limited, and it varies a little bit year to year. So there's not a commitment on a certain amount. But we work hard to make sure that any research projects students are interested in, that the scale of that is within our budget and we can fund that, but still do what the student wanted to do. So there is some funding for it. I wouldn't say it's gobs of money if you think you're wanting to do something traveling all over the world or some intensive lab work or something like that. And you do not need a specific major, but there are prerequisites related to, Ginny, you'll have to help me here, biology.
Yeah, the only prerequisite is 2 semesters, so 1 academic year of biology. Some related, but it doesn't have to be specific biology. If you wanted a list of options, I can send that to you. Just let me know. But some sort of biology class.
Yeah. And we have a whole range. People come in from an animal science background, an animal behavior, pre-vet, to psychology, sociology. We have history majors and literature, English literature majors and religion majors. I mean, it's a whole range. We have people coming right out of undergrad, so they just graduated and they're immediately rolling into the program. And we have people who have been working a few years, and sometimes people are coming back after working 20 or 30 years. So it's a whole mix, which I think is very exciting because there's a lot of a range of experiences, and the students really can learn from each other. And I think it just provides a very rich environment that way. Oh, and study abroad opportunities. There's not, because it's only a 1 year to 18-month program, there's not really an opportunity to study abroad like you would think of in undergrad. However, it could be possible to do your externship abroad. We have had students do that. Because it's not a formal part of our program, generally speaking, we'll help the student, but they figure it out. Like 1 year we had a student who did her externship. She worked as a research assistant with someone in Japan, but she had family in Japan. So that personal connection helped make that happen. Another student did something with coral reefs off of Thailand, but she had already spent some time in Thailand volunteering with an organization there, and so had a lot of connections there. So it can happen, but it's I would say that's fairly unusual, and a lot relies on the student kind of figuring out what'll work for them. Other questions? It ranges. We're a relatively small program. So right now we have 16 students, and they go through together all the classes except for the electives. So all the core classes they take together in the fall, and then in the spring they have the core courses together, but then there's a little more divergence between applied track and research track, and then the electives. So relatively small. Sometimes it's smaller, might be 12 students, but it's around 16, 18. So it's a nice faculty student ratio. Yes, we have had students who deferred for a year for a variety of reasons, and that just gets all worked out with admissions.
Sorry, I'm particularly interested in studying human-wildlife conflict. Have you had students
Mhm.
study that in the past? I saw this like an aspect of the 4 pillars of the program and curriculum.
Mhm.
And then what do you see them doing afterwards, after they graduate?
So we've had students on both, we have a very active work and study in this area of, wildlife, human, I'd say interactions, but of course some, conflict there. But let's see, we've had students do both research and externships, so that we've had students do externships with like a forestry service or exotic pet trade, with working on behalf of like some organizations out west who are working on behalf of bears, grizzly bears, or wolves or coyotes. Wild Earth Guardians is we've placed a few students there for externships. And then for research, students have worked on different studies, sometimes observational, going out and trying to understand better the patterns of behavior of people and animals in a space. A lot of times doing survey work to understand people's attitudes or values or preferences for management, or, surveys of opinions in a certain conflict area or something like that. So it can range from for both research and applied track. It could be a hands-on experience, or it could be a variety of, interacting with stakeholders, writing letters to the editor and blog posts, and organizing events and educational information, and, helping with research to understand, people's preferences or the issues that are going on. So, it could be a whole range of things. Does that help, Sam?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure. And, if this is something you're thinking about, we could set you up with Dr. Rutberg for to talk. He leads the wildlife area in the MAPP program, so you want to have
Yeah,
a
that would be
more
great.
in-depth conversation. If you're right, if you want to be enrolled in the program, right, you'd have to apply, and it is an in-person program. So we don't obviously we do allow students to attend a class on Zoom if they're sick or something like that, but the program is a in-person in Grafton, Massachusetts program. So you would be expected to attend classes in person, and the internships are often in person. Some organizations do allow remote externships, but if you at all want to sort of hands-on experience, those would all be, obviously at a location. How competitive are admissions? I think we're looking for a range of experiences, and students bringing different interests and ideas to the program. So we value that higher than, I would say, kind of pure academic numbers. So we'll put an emphasis. We weight heavily people coming in with a different experiences and looking for different things, or wanting to focus on farm animal, and another person on wildlife, and another person on companion animals. We value that mix, that mix of views. So I think probably more so than, just a pure numbers. It's not a numbers game for us. So I don't know if that hopefully helps answer your question. We really look very closely at all of the applications and try to get a feel for applicants' interests and what they bring to the program and where they want to go. All right, so if other questions, I'm going to close my chat because it blocks my screen, but Ginny, just give me a shout if anything comes up. Happy to answer other questions. Other things might occur to you as we roll along. In the meantime, I thought it would help to share a little bit about my background and my interest areas. So I have a master's in clinical psychology, but I really come at things as a social psychologist. I was in the US Army. I worked in market research for a long time, and then I moved over to Animal Rescue League of Boston to lead their Center for Shelter Dogs program. And when that was a grant funded program, and when that closed down, we were able to move that over to Cummings School, and that became part of the Center for Animals and Public Policy, and it's been renamed Collaborative for Shelter Dogs. And that's really, that program is focused on finding ways to improve the welfare and behavioral health of dogs in shelters, as well as other companion animals, mainly focused on dogs, and how to support pet ownership in the community, and looking at kind of industry trends in the sheltering in the US as well. So I teach both research methods 1 and 2, as well as human dimensions of animal behavior and the applied animal behavior course in the spring. I'm associate director of the Collaborative for Shelter Dogs. And then my research areas for, as I mentioned, aligned with the Collaborative for Shelter Dogs, looking at dogs and animals in shelters, their behavioral health and welfare, as well as supporting pet ownership, and looking at animal sheltering trends and topics. I'm really interested in how people's knowledge and perception of behavior influences their own interactions and reactions to animals, and how that influences the human-animal bond and the welfare of the animal. And this has led me recently into doing work in an area called Human Dimensions of Wildlife. So if you're interested, that's some of recent publications. You can find me on Google Scholar. And currently, these are my current interest areas. Still working to help animals in shelters and supporting pet ownership in the community. And then I'm in the middle of a study looking at breeding dog welfare. What kinds of, what are the experiences of owners who have dogs, pregnant dogs, or dogs who have litters of puppies, and maybe that was intentional or maybe it was accidental, and how did that go, and what resources would they need to better support the welfare of their dogs. And then looking at some of that perception and attitudes research and how that influences our interactions with animals and our preferences for management for those animals. So I just wanted to give a little teaser, talking about knowledge and perceptions of animal behavior. I always get this question about, well, aren't we pretty good at reading animal behavior, especially like dog and cat body language and behavior, because we live with them all the time, as well as our other companion animals. And right now the research is pretty mixed. It's kind of, we're sort of okay about it. It really depends on the species. We're better at reading dog body language than cat body language. It actually depends on the actual behavior and emotional state of the animal. We're pretty good at reading friendliness and friendly behavior, not so good at reading stress or fear in our animals, our companion animals. And some of our own characteristics and background can influence how good we are. Some research shows people with a lot of professional experience do well at reading some animal behavior. Other research shows they don't do any better than the general public, or having a past dog doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be an expert at reading dog behavior, contrary to what you might expect. So kind of a mixed bag there, which I always find really interesting, that it can vary so much. So, our own knowledge and our own past experience can influence our perception of behavior, but it turns out a lot of other external factors can influence our perception. Characteristics about the animal, like their coat color, cat coat color, can influence people's perception of that cat's personality. If there's toys in a picture, or a collar or a ribbon, if there's people in a picture, that can change our perception of that animal's personality or behavior. But sometimes some research finds a toy makes a difference, and other research says, no, it didn't make a difference. So it's a little bit, there's a little bit of inconsistency there, and some of that depends on how things were measured. In my own research, a little while ago, did a study with a student from the MAPP program, looking at trying to create optimal adoption photos for dogs in the shelter. And we're looking to see, well, does the type of photo you create, does that influence people's perception of that animal and their interest in that animal? So we actually, this was prompted because at the time I was seeing so many photos on Pet Finder of dogs behind cages, and I was like, that's a terrible photo. Why, you're not showing off the dog to the best, to its best. And so how can I convince people to take, the effort and take better photos, something like that. So I said, let's do a research study. So we actually had 12 conditions. You can see 3 different breeds, and then the condition of, behind the bars, just in a room, with a friendly shelter worker, and outside. And then we ran an experimental design, a survey of visitors to Pet Finder. So these are people actually visiting Pet Finder, presumably interested in adopting, or at least like to look at available pets on Pet Finder. And then we intercepted their visit and then asked them if they wanted to participate in the study. And then they only saw one of these pictures, and then answered a series of questions and ratings of that. And, asking you, what do you think, which condition do you think got the most interest? You could shout out, we're a small number here.
I'd say either the 2 on the right.
Yeah, over here. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Like, isn't your eye like naturally more attracted over here? So, and you can see we tried to get similar positions, mouth open, tongue out, which was a little tricky because we couldn't say, hey, bud, put your tongue out. So we had to take a lot of photos and try to get the similar conditions. So this was a rating scale and looking at amicability or friendliness of the dogs, and it was a whole series of questions. It wasn't just one question, so this is an average of that. But basically what we found is that, the dogs in all 3 dogs in the room with person and outside were seen as fairly friendly, but the one behind the bars was seen as much less friendly. So it had an impact. It influenced people's perception of that dog's friendliness, and in fact lowered it. And when you go back and look at it, you can see, yeah, they just don't look as friendly, right? So, and then we also asked about their adoption interests, because remember, these people thought these dogs were actually real shelter dogs, but by the time the study ran, they'd all been adopted, which we did tell people after. So, but we asked, like, how interested would you be in getting information about this dog, seeing this dog for a potential adoption? And there was only kind of moderate levels here, but you can see again, the dog behind the bars, there was less interest in adopting or for getting information about that dog to adopt. So, we had some other measures, but I was excited because I could take this and then go out to the shelters and animal control officers I was working with at the time and say, look, I have data, I have evidence to show your photos make a difference. So we have to do a better job at showcasing your pets. So that was pretty cool. Later, working with a MAPP student, we did a similar study looking at cats and the different things that could influence people's perception of the cat. This was inspired by a study by Lori Kogan, who was looking at black cats and if a ribbon would help create more interest in the cats, which in general it did. And so you can see we varied the conditions, 2 different cat colors, because we know coat color makes a difference, as well as, are they in a bed or with a little bow tie or some toys around, and if that made a difference. We didn't find a huge difference here, but I think it was the bow tie did create some more interest in the cat. Mostly people like to just tell us how cute the cat was. Then we also went with another MAPP student. I did a study looking at breed stereotypes and if they influence people's perception of a dog in a mock bite situation. So we made up a story about a dog bite situation where there was kind of enough blame to go around between the dog, but the owners, and then we varied the breed. And we also had a condition where we said mixed breed, and then another condition where we didn't say any kind of breed. And certainly we found that if the dog was a pit bull, people um, uh, blame that dog a little more, and we're a little more negative about that dog. And if we ask them what breed it is, even though we had originally told them the breed, people, even in like the lab condition where we had said it was a lab, a lot of people still said it was a pit bull when we asked them to recall it. So we know the influence of the stereotype of pit bull type dogs is very strong. And even in the absence of information, people will fill it in because they're tapping into that schema, into that stereotype. So that was information that we could share with advocates about like what are best strategies, because we know visual identification of many mixed breed dogs, including pit bull type dogs, is not very accurate. So people just fill in with what they expect based on that stereotype. Okay. So this is my way I think about behavior, where it just feeds into so many areas. It's rarely just the animal's behavior in a vacuum. It's really, there's a lot of context. We're influenced by a lot of things, not just our animal's behavior, and we in fact influence our animals, the animal's behavior. And so it's this cycle. And so we need to really to support pet ownership and good bonds between humans and their animals, the animals in their lives. We really need to look at the whole picture here and look at ways we can best do that, best support those relationships. So that was just a little teaser of some of the work I do. I'm happy to answer any questions about that, or if any other questions came up about the MAPP program. And Sam, you had mentioned interest in wildlife. I mean, these are some of the same things. There's a whole area of research called Human Dimensions of Wildlife. And this would be looking at, how do people value nature and wildlife and their existence, and how do we manage populations to the benefit of people, to the benefit of the wildlife, to the benefit of the ecosystem, and then what are things that might influence those preferences for management, attitudes or past experience or media exposure, or those kinds of things. So if you're at all interested in that, you can do some Googling Human Dimensions of Wildlife. It's a pretty interesting field. All right, I will, let's see, mention the upcoming events. And then I'm going to stop screen sharing just so we can get to the end here, and I can see if there's any questions at all.
Yeah, I had a follow-up about like earlier in the presentation, the campus being in Grafton. Do you see like most students like sort of taking up a lease for the year, or most students commute? What goes on with that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a suburban pretend rural area. So, but there are towns in the area, and Worcester is in the area. So, there's a pretty active student base. They find it's not like a college town, right? Where you think of like all this housing around the town, but there are a lot of options for housing. It's just kind of sprinkled around and pretty accessible. Plus students, the MAPP students, there's another master's program as well. That's 1 year. They are rotating in and out, but the vet students are here for 3 years or so. And they, so there's a whole very active group. Is it Facebook, Ginny? Like a group where they share information about available apartments. I think it's a little harder if
have
you
a
don't have a
lot.
car. Yeah, sorry,
Oh,
go ahead,
yeah.
Ginny.
Oh, I was just gonna say, we do have several options that we've been coordinating with the school. So we have a Google Sheet that we started where everybody keeps track of where they stayed, if they're looking for roommates and stuff like that, so you can see what's available, what people have done, what they've charged, what's included. And then we also work with the Student Affairs Office to share information with the DVM students and what they have available. And also with so there's DVM interns and residents who are here for about the same amount of time as you guys. So we work with that office too to share information. And there is a Facebook group, I think maybe you're thinking of, Shauna, that is pretty active. And I shared the link with anyone who's incoming, that's also shared with the other master students and the DVM students for whoever's looking for housing and what they have, or if someone has housing and stuff like that. And we see a lot of, it's nice actually, you get to maybe share space with someone else on campus instead of just in your program. So, I mean, you have the choice to do whatever you want, but it's helped since I've been here, field a lot of questions and calls and panic. So, and people do commute from as far as like Boston sometimes. Um, I don't know if we have any this year, but I know that we do here and there, and someone from even one of the shore, North Shore, South Shore, it's not
Yeah, it's not short, yeah.
yeah, not, you can do it. And then the MCM program also has classes in Boston, so that opens up doors for, anywhere between here and Boston, pretty much. So I don't know if that helps. I'm not sure where you're looking to commute from.
No, I was just trying to get a grasp of like what people were doing and that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, they usually are leasing, if they're not from the area, they are leasing for a year.
Yeah, I
From,
gotcha.
just the area.
Mhm.
Yep. And like Jenny mentioned, sometimes people are commuting from a little further, like students, either they already lived in Boston or they wanted, that's where they prefer to live. And we are on a commuter rail stop. It's a little bit of a walk, but it's doable. It's hard to live in the area though if you don't have a car. That's the one thing I would say, because it is suburbs, so well out suburbs. So to get around, you really need a car in our area. All right, well, if you come up with any other questions or need more information, I mean, you contact Ginny, feel free to contact myself, happy to have a chat about anything or things I can answer in email. Certainly if you're interested in any of my research, I'm happy to chat further about it, so feel free to reach out.